All right, so now that we have our basic shapes in, what we're now going to do is we're going to follow the contour of our bird and kind of start to attach the shapes a little bit more and make some of those noticeable features of the bird a little bit more pronounced. So let's start at the base of our beak. So we can see here, if we are starting at this little rectangular section, we're going to see that there's a little group of feathers that's attached on our reference photo. That's going to go out like that. Now, if we continue down, what we're going to see is we have the chin area right down here, and that is going to merge into our neck area. Now remember, the shapes that we had before are simply little placeholders to give us a general sense of where the different parts of the bird's kind of form or structure are. So we can continuously adjust these as we go if we see something that's off. All right, so now we have that. We could keep on bringing our neck down and start to add in just a couple of outlines of these feathers here. We're just gonna follow along the contour of our bird and add in the little bits of detail to our outline. Now these feathers are simply just going to be basically overlapping triangles that we have. And you'll notice that the neck, I didn't draw as a straight line across because that's not what it looks like in the photo. We can see it has this slight angle to it. So we want to represent that in our drawing as well. All right, perfect. So now, next spot that I want to move on to, if we follow our contour around, I'm going to go back the other way and I'm going to keep on working on the beak. Now, our beak, what we're going to see is there's this line that separates the upper and lower section of the beak called the mandibles. So if we bring the point of our beak up, we can see that there's going to be a little bit of a divot here. And that divot is very, very characteristic of birds of prey and eagles in particular. So that will be something that we'll definitely want to include in ours to give a good sense of that eagle beak character. And we're gonna follow along. Now it's always important to keep in mind the different angles that the contour line that we're drawing follows. There will be hardly ever any straight lines in these photos. All right, so something about like that. Now, one of the things I've noticed after I've drawn this here is that I think that this section looks a little too rounded. It doesn't have quite as much of a gradient or a slope as it does in the photo. So I'm just going to erase that and adjust that just a little bit. All right, something like that. That's a little bit better. Now, you'll notice on the beak of the eagle, there's a little section where the nostril is that it looks like it's a slightly separate section from the rest of the beak. And that's called the cere, and that's where the nostril's held. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to represent that in our outline as well. And it's going to bump up, jump just a little bit higher than the rest of the beak. Awesome, so we're slowly filling in the rest of those details of our outline. All right, so we're gonna keep on moving along our contour now. So now that we've done most of our beak here, let's move on to the head. So the head, we don't really have to add too much detail to the head now. We can adjust the shape a little bit if we want, but I think it's actually pretty good like that. That's not too bad at all. All right, so let's just finish up our beak here. So the rest of the beak, we can see there's this small fleshy part around the end of the mouth right here, and we're gonna wanna add that in. And you can see the direction of it, or the outline of it, the contour follows essentially the shape of that mouth that we had drawn in earlier. So we can kind of simply follow that a little bit. All right, and then we're gonna add in just a line that distinguishes the beak from this area of feathers right in there. All right, perfect. So that's a pretty good start to our outline here. Maybe we want to bring this up just a little bit and make that line a little bit more gradual. You can always have room to change things. Oh, perfect. So let's add in a little bit more of the details around the eye. So you'll see on this eagle's eye, what we have are there's multiple different sections to it, right? It's not just one circle. We have a yellow, more fleshy part around it. And so we can add that in. And it's pretty close to a circle, but if we look at it closely, we can see that there might be some areas that aren't quite as perfectly round. So get a good sense of which areas might not be quite as round, get used to those. Practice drawing in the different curves of that eye there. All right, so now we're gonna add in the iris. And now the iris won't be perfectly center in that black ring that we had drawn earlier. It's going to be slightly shifted to the front, and it will also be not perfectly round. Now it'll be more of an oval or an egg shape. Now by having it closer to the front of that black section, what we're going to see is it's going to make it look like our eagle is looking forward. If it was perfectly in the center, it would look like it was looking directly out to the side. Same thing for our pupil. All right, we have something along the lines of that. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in a couple of the feather groups that we can see, a little bit more detail. I'm gonna lightly erase that and use that just as a guide to show where the head will meet the neck. And we can add in a little bit of detail representing the feathers in that area. Now these are just little strokes. This is just to give us a general guideline of where we're going to be adding in our detail with our charcoal later. Now with this, it's really important to follow the direction that the feather is going. The feathers aren't all going to be moving in the same direction across the entirety of the head or the neck. So we're always going to want to look at what direction the feathers are going and mimic that with our outline. Now we can see here, for example, in this section right here, the feathers look like they're going off to the side a little bit, but then curving or curling down. So we're going to want to represent that as well. Same with around our eye, we can see that the feathers kind of follow the contour of that eye, but then they're going to curve, straighten out a little bit, and then go down. Now I like to add in these little bits of detail, mainly because it will remind me the direction that I'm going to be putting in my charcoal when I get to that stage. All right, now that's looking pretty good so far. The last thing I think I'm gonna add in with the outline is I'm simply just going to extend the neck area down into that back a little bit. Now with these pastel studies, I often like to make them portraits where we're just looking at the head and maybe a little bit of the neck, shoulder, back area, but we're going to be fading it out we're going to be fading the detail out once we get to this shoulder back area. But that being said, I'm just going to add in just a little bit Now you could add in some shapes here, but since we're just going to be following the contour and not actually adding in any really definition in this area later on, you could probably just add in a little bit of contour along the edges there. All right, so that looks pretty good for our outline.